Okay, welcome to the March 6th meeting of the Zoning Subcommittee. This meeting is being recorded for later broadcast by Amherst Media. Are there any other announcements? I have an announcement, assuming that many of you are here to talk about the proposal that's been put forth for Cushman Village. And presumably the item that's on our agenda for natural resource conservation development. We don't have anything currently planned for the warrant. It's highly unlikely that the zoning subcommittee is going to ask to bring this amendment forward right now. We just have it on the warrant because we're interested in the news that is going on, and we wanted to see if there was anything of interest in this item. And so we got an analysis from the staff, and we'll review that later in the meeting. But just so you know, there's no proposal before the planning board for that land right now, and there's no zoning amendment that would pertain to that land coming to this town meeting.
Mr. Chair, what are you referring to?
There's a subdivision proposal for Cushman Village area off Henry Street.
The Cinda Jones proposal?
Yes, right, yes.
Oh, okay, but which we're not,
We haven't done.
There was
of course,
right.
or if there is, I don't know.
So the Coles Company proposed a potential replacement for, or a substitute for TDR, a different kind of development method.
Oh, okay.
It's on the agenda, and I just asked to put it on the agenda so that we could take a look at it if it.
All right, thank you, because I thought it was.
But I don't anticipate that we'll take any action on it, but it's worth taking a look anyways. Do we have minutes from? Okay, there's no minutes. So, go ahead.
I had sent minutes.
Okay, then I apologize.
Okay.
We'll have those next time.
Okay, so there's none to review right now, unless somebody saw something that I didn't.
I didn't see that.
Okay. So the purpose of a zoning subcommittee meeting, for the most part, is for the committee to review the amendments that have been proposed, and to make a recommendation to the staff. We'll take public comment if we can, if we have time, or if you have something that is very pertinent to our discussion. But for the most part, we're not taking advocacy comments. There's just not enough time. Go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that the planning board does have a public comment period on its agenda. I think it's beginning at 8 o'clock, the zoning subcommittee report, and then public comment period after that. So that will occur later tonight.
Okay, so let's get to the amendments. I guess I want to first note that staff has also proposed some potential new amendments, and they seem fairly small, at least in current form. Do you think we should start these now?
If you want to start with those, we can.
Let's look at those now, because they're part of the whole package of things that we're doing.
Mr. Chair, maybe we should chip away at the main event before we. I'm sorry, friendly suggestion?
Okay, main event meaning?
The ones that we've been working.
Okay, sure, that's fine. Did you want to start with one in particular?
No, maybe
Three.
just go the order of listed, or I'm sorry to have interrupted.
That's okay.
I would prefer that, just because I'm worried if we start on new territory, we may not get through our conversation in preparation for tonight's meeting.
Okay. So the first item is mixed-use building standards and conditions. This looks like the change reflects the language that we wanted to make sure that it's not first floor dwelling units are not facing other public ways other than streets. And that seems to be the only change from previous.
I believe so.
Does that satisfy people's concerns? Do you?
We just changed from previous drafts we've looked at,
Right.
because we are making a change of the 10% to the 15%.
Yes.
This does look like what we discussed at our last meeting, which would, for people who maybe don't know what the conversation has been, that we're considering allowing some amount of residential use on the first floor in a mixed-use building to the rear of the street, so we don't end up in some circumstances with very long, deep commercial to retail spaces where the back isn't useful to anybody. So at least that was my thinking, and I think this reflects that conversation.
I have a couple grammar-related comments. In the first, in the last paragraph there, you have associated twice in the first sentence, and perhaps only one is needed.
Oh.
I think the first one can be deleted.
Yeah, yes.
I guess that's the only thing that's really important. I want to raise the issue of, in the first paragraph, residential uses above the first floor exceed 2 thresholds for a special permit. And I just want to make sure that that's what the committee wants, since we're talking about increasing or raising the threshold. Do we want to maybe not raise it so much and take away above the first floor and consider any residential use contributing to those thresholds? Go ahead.
I just wanted to offer, if you wanted to have a 3-story building and you wanted the upper floors to be residential, then this ratio works well, that you can have up to twice as much residential space as commercial space and still have this be by site plan review.
Mhm.
So, just wanted to offer that.
Okay, so you're saying the first floor would automatically trigger a special permit if it's 3 floors, right?
I kind of just clicked into a few things I had, the version I'd marked up. Since we're doing sort of micro grammar, the last paragraph, this word says any residential uses on upper floors. Since we may be having some residential use on the ground floor, would that then preclude storage or any of those ancillary kind of things for the possible apartments on the first floor? Or other purpose, any residential uses on upper floors?
Yeah, the way that it's written now, it talks about not allowing more than 15% for those associated incidental space uses for upstairs.
So if,
No part of the first floor would be used in support of the upper floors beyond stairs and elevators.
but what if part of, okay, so you could still use part of the first floor for the first floor
units.
residential, that doesn't preclude that.
Right.
So I'm just, if that's clear, as long as that's clear, because in total, that could be more than the 15%.
I think also, I'm thinking through the last comment about when a special permit gets kicked in, and I don't believe the way this is written now, and we need to look at it again, but I don't believe that this would require a special permit for dwelling units on the first floor in the commercial district. The only trigger for a special permit is residential uses or in criteria associated with residential uses above the first floor. So it's not, the first floor residential uses appear to be, at least in the commercial district, allowed by right,
Okay, so,
under site plan review.
okay, so you're assured that if there are other needs to serve the first floor units, like a storage locker or whatever, that would not be counted as part of the 15%.
Because the entire sentence leads to any residential uses on upper floors and is qualifying that, that's my belief, yeah.
Okay. And my just last thing, and I think for me the crux of what might be kind of worrisome for some people is going from 6 to 12, and I just would, and I think maybe you were alluding to that, that we left that in there for now as a placeholder, but I'm not convinced that's the absolute right number, and I guess this would be the time to talk about that here.
Right, we should make a recommendation to the planning board of what we think is the right number. And do you have a suggestion?
I was thinking of something that lies between 6 and 12.
Go ahead, Chris.
I just wanted to point out something that Mr. Kuhn said a few meetings ago. He said that the square footage of a typical two-bedroom apartment might be somewhere around 1,200 feet, 1,200 square feet. So if you had 6 1,200 square foot apartments on one floor, that would be 7,200 square feet. And then you'd need associated hallways and everything. But maybe what you'd like to do is think about how big a building would be, and then whether that would be an appropriate number of units in one floor in a building. And Mr. Schreiber, being an architect, may be able to weigh in on that.
Yes, I'm not sure it's an architectural, I think it's more of a social, kind of more of a social issue, but my gut feeling is that 6 is not the right number, it's too low. And 12, I mean, seriously, it's a little bit of, 24 is too big a number, so I would choose somewhere between 6 and 24. In other words, I think that in 12, just the ones that, I think that there's a big obstacle for this actually being used, that the 6 is a very low number. So I think it has to be north of 6. So I don't think 6 is the right number. I don't encourage mixed-use buildings.
Given that, well, again, it's a design question, but given that it's likely that we're talking about a layout that involves a central hall and units on both sides, we're probably dealing with an even number of units. 7,200, say 8,000 square feet is a pretty good-sized building. Remember, what this is doing is it's establishing a sort of the threshold at which you cross over into special permit territory. It doesn't say you can't do more than 12. It says if you get to the 13th unit on upper floors, you're talking about a special permit. You could pull it back to 10.
It's kind of number.
Just as a sort of
Yeah.
source of reassurance for people.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
again, this is only on the upper floors, and we're only talking about 3-story buildings, at least at the moment.
My intuition is to pull it back a little bit, and I don't think it is a design. Ms. Brestrup, you're being very rational in a way to analyze it, but I don't think that's what's going to sell it at the end of the day.
Okay, so yeah, that is an interesting way of looking at it, actually. So an 8,000 square foot building, do we want a special permit to kick in if there's an 8,000 square foot building with what looks like there could be 12 units?
That's the footprint, too.
A footprint, it's a footprint building.
Going
Yes. Or do we think that an 8,000 square foot building should have 12 units by site plan review?
But we are silent on the size of the units.
Yeah.
I mean, we're proposing to be silent on that.
Right.
So they could be, micro units, right?
It could be one-bedroom,
Yeah, studios.
be studio units,
Mhm.
yeah.
Bruce?
I would be comfortable with 10, but I also have a question again about the 15%. To me, it would seem to be more clear if the 15% would either be a unit on the first floor in the back or storage and elevators and so forth. I think to say 15% can be storage and then a unit too, I wonder if that seems a little confusing, the way it's written.
As written, it would not be both. The 15% would not be capturing both. The 15% is only talking about first floor space that is somehow serving the upstairs
Right.
residential units. Separate from that, there might be residential units on the first floor. And remember, building size can vary rather significantly. On the first floor, if we're in the commercial district, which I think is one of the principal targets for this, you're talking about units on the back with the possibility, and that's why there's mention of landscape treatment and parking and so forth associated with those units on the outside. And right now, there's no limitation on that in the current draft, nor have we heard any intent to put a limit on that.
I'm just wondering if there could be fear that this could mean you'd have the 15% storage and then a very large unit in the first floor, and would there be enough space for an office or retail at the front?
I think
I mean, without having it be really tiny.
Well, so the first sentence does say any associated internal space associated with a dwelling unit. I think that's regardless of whether it's on the first floor or not. So I don't think there can be any storage in the front of the building.
And the use is by definition, I understand what you're saying, is by definition a mixed use. It has business as well as residential uses. What I hear your concern being is that it's going to be a 10 by 10 cigar lotto ticket kiosk in the corner, and everything else is going to be
what I mean,
residential.
right.
You could talk about
Ratio.
ratios. That's always a challenge. You could say no less than. That's always a challenge because then you're talking about what the market is going to bear. But we could certainly do that.
Well, I'm just wondering about even something like 25%, including the storage and a unit, or 50%, or whatever would seem logical, but just to make it clear that a significant portion of that first floor still has to be related to business.
Comments?
That may be something that we get public comment on, either now at our next meeting, because if that's a concern that others share, then I wouldn't be uncomfortable putting in a ratio, if that gives people some assurances on that point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any further comments on this article? I mean, I'm fine with 10, 12, 8. It doesn't matter to me really.
11?
I think it should
11 and
be-
a half?
I think it should be an
It's
even
easier
number.
to deal with round numbers.
Chris?
I just wanted to note that if you allow fewer units, you may end up with larger units. And is that something that you want to happen or not? So,
Ms. Brestrup, do you mean larger in terms of overall square footage, or do you mean larger in terms of the number of bedrooms?
larger in terms of the number of bedrooms.
Because some communities have looked at increasing density in terms of number of bedrooms and letting the owner decide how to manipulate that. So, that's a different kind of threshold to set. X number of units or not to exceed, say if it's 10, you could say not to exceed 30 bedrooms or something, because it gets more at impact in some ways than density computed just by units. But we haven't really looked at that at all, so I'm not suggesting it for now. But, larger units of the same bedroom size, I think, is a positive. I guess we get into McMansion apartments if it gets too big. Should we be worrying?
Oh, I just would remind the subcommittee when we were talking about form-based zoning for last time around, part of the notion was to require a mix of bedroom types, a roughly equivalent mix of bedroom types, so that you didn't end up with either all big apartments that are essentially dormitories, or all single bedroom or studio apartments. That all of the potential markets for those units could be served. it's a challenging way to go, but it addresses that question.
Just one more thing is that the number of dwelling units is also going to be limited by the amount of space on the lot for parking. So that may be sort of a self-limiting kind of thing. So you may want to allow more units, knowing that they may not be able to get to that maximum number. Just another thought.
Okay, so this is something that we've asked the planning board to chime in on, and we haven't really gotten feedback yet on that number. So we'll explain our discussion to them and hopefully arrive at a consensus tonight. I should also mention they're scheduled tonight. This article and the next article, mixed use center dimensions, are scheduled for public hearings tonight, but the planning board at its last meeting decided that it would continue those hearings to at least the following planning board meeting. But I imagine that we will at least discuss them tonight.
I would take the opportunity to point you at the meeting and public hearing schedule and the deadlines. We have, after tonight, next Monday, the first preliminary list of warrant articles is due. And we can do that, and that's flexible. Things can be added to it subsequently as long as it happens before the signing of the warrant. And then after your next meeting, which is March 20th, on the 26th, the actual language is due. So by that, we have one more meeting after this next meeting to sort of finalize all of what is going to be included and decide where we're going to focus our attention in terms of trying to get the language ready.
So if we don't have a public hearing on the form-based design regulations until April 3rd, and we get significant feedback at that time, we would not be able to change it before the 8th, you're saying?
That's right. Well, you could get significant feedback, and the board could that night decide what kind of changes you would want, but the board would not then be able to see and confirm that, yes, what staff has done in response to our instructions is what we want. It would have to, you might want to authorize the chair or something. It would be more tenuous.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. Are you ready to move on to the next one? Sure, go ahead, please.
Hi, Janet Keller from Precinct 1. You noted that, Mr. Tucker noted that commercial was one of the principal targets for the increasing the density in a number of ways, but in this case for the mixed buildings, mixed-use buildings. The other one I see commercial is College Street area, that intersection, and I saw on another, that's in the BL, limited business. Can you tell me where those were? I've got my big zoning map with me, but I couldn't quite discern where those were.
Limited business districts currently are, there's 3 small ones on the edges of the downtown. There's one west of the Amherst Cinema. There's one north of Coles Lane on the west side of the main drag. And there's one north of Triangle Street, sort of opposite or north of Bertucci's, that area north
I
of
did think
Triangle
I
Street.
saw that one, but I kind of was confused about where the other was.
Those
were.
are the 3 that are associated with the downtown. Much of all of the property on the west side of University Drive and the New Market Center building are in the limited business district. And currently, the property that contains Atkins Farm Market is in the limited business district. And I think that's it for our BL districts. I just happen to have the map here if you want to check.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay. So we take a look at mixed-use center district dimensions. These incorporate the changes that we have discussed at previous meetings, and it breaks the three districts into different parts of the article. Is there any other change?
Well, what we did was the division into chunks is the first set of amendments for the dimensions of limited business and commercial, and then the accompanying footnote changes for that. That's one piece. The next section is just changing the dimensional requirements for the Village Center Business District. Third section is just changing the dimensional requirements for the downtown general business district. And the final piece is the amendments that are associated with this to the principal section on maximum height, defining maximum height, and changing the way we measure that in terms of how we define what point on a roof we're drawing the line. And then it also would include an ability under a special permit to modify the maximum heights in the mixed-use business district, and for the time being, the Village Center Residence District is also included because there are some mixed uses allowed in that district, to adjust the maximum height for compelling reasons of building function, utility, or design, including but not limited to allowing construction of the full number of maximum floors under difficult site conditions such as steep grades or with a pitched roof design or similar conditions. And the special permit granting authority has to consider the existing architectural context when making that decision.
Okay, so I guess I also noticed that in the BG district here, the current draft has a smaller maximum height for.
I believe that this is based on the notes from the last meeting.
Yeah,
We've
so-
gone up 5 feet.
Because it's 5, potentially 10.
Yeah.
Potentially a change of up to 15 from.
Well, previous drafts had 65 there, and I think 55 is much better. And so I would like to include BG. I would like to include that in the article. We had talked about whether or not we wanted to keep that in there, and now that it's at that number, I would like to include it. Comments from the zoning subcommittee about any of the numbers you see or language?
I want to appreciate staff for reformatting this, and in a way it may not make as much sense for some viewers, but I like having it in distinct pieces, and it's helpful to me. My only 2 comments on 6.19 maximum height, which is the language that Mr. Tucker just read. I think this is a place where a graphic of a small line drawing would be helpful. We have those in different parts of the bylaw because we kind of waded into that. What's the midpoint of a pitched roof? And I think it sort of cries out for a small graphic. And then I had just underscored the where we set a maximum of 10 feet. And I'm comfortable with the 10 feet, but I thought it would be worth just reviewing it again because it's the implications for height to make sure we're comfortable with that. That's what we have now.
That currently exists.
Right.
So
Right.
you're pointing
It's-
out that
Yes, it's what we have now.
we just put that number in there to
Right, the change is adding, we already have the word 10, you're adding the numeral 10.
Right, just, yeah.
Um,
Right, so the question is, should that number be a different number, or should any of the other numbers that we're proposing be different, so that the maximum
I'm
doesn't exceed any number that we don't like? So I guess I'll just point out that the current maximum height in BLCOM is 35. We're proposing to raise that by 5 feet. No change in maximum height in BVC proposed. And maximum height in BG proposed to raise by 5 feet, with the existing 10-foot variance under certain conditions standing. So I guess I don't see that as a huge change in any of the zones. So just
Clarification too.
yep. Okay, go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to mention that one of the reasons that the 10 feet works is because of houses that are set on a hillside and the backyard slopes down, and if you have a walkout basement, then the 10 feet, works for the walkout basement.
That's a good point.
Because that facade ends up being 10 feet higher than the front facade.
So
That's where it comes from.
so changing that would also affect residential dimensions. Right. Ms. Brown.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the translations here. The maximum height is being changed to go up 5 feet, but also where you measure the maximum height has changed so that actually it could go up a lot more than that, depending on the height of the mansard roof or the pitch of the other types of roofs. So I think it's very misleading. I would like height to be height.
If I may.
Of residential, or, I don't know. I mean, let's just have one number that doesn't reference whether it's a flat roof or a mansard roof or a peaked roof or a whatever roof. A height seems to me what is the significant thing. And to complicate it like this and sort of, on the one hand, call it a height in the draft here, and then find that there's other things that are going to affect the height, the antennas or the electronics that you've got on top, or the air conditioner, or whatever, and then also where you're going to measure on the roof seems to be a little obtuse or something.
Okay.
So I'd like that to be more clear, so that you don't always have to dig to find out what height really means.
Yep, that's a good point. Thank you.
If I may, the notion of having a single number is not changing. What's changing is responding to different kinds of architecture. A flat roof building would be measured to the top of the highest point of the roof. A mansard roof, which comes up and then has a flat section on it, would be measured to that deck, to the top. The only real change, and that would be the case now, the only real change is responding to pitched roofs, where you have the potential for having, with dormers, a floor essentially within the roof area. And this being New England, and given the kinds of architecture that the community has, pitched roofs are in many cases much preferable to a flat roof, certainly in terms of maintenance over time with ice and snow and all of that. This is a very common way of measuring maximum height in other communities. It responds to the fact that there are parts of pitched roofs in particular that really aren't part of the habitable space in the property.
But to the citizen who's not familiar with these generally accepted heights of buildings, it would be nice to be able to read that the maximum height was going to be X number of feet, and that's what they would.
That's what it's saying. That's what it's saying. And I think what Ms. Kruger was saying, it would be helpful to have diagrams to show this.
Yeah.
And if there were pictures, illustrations, making that really clear, in this case it goes to here, in this case it goes to here, then it would be obvious. No, there's one number. One number, doesn't change. What changes is how you respond to the different kinds of roofs.
If I might, may, so I completely understand that it's confusing, but
Thank you, Stephen. Very.
but certainly architects and real estate folks are used to dealing with this. We fully understand that, everyone else is not. But in the world of architecture, maximum height almost never means the actual. It almost never means the actual height. It actually means some other kind of a calculation. But so what's happening though is what we don't want to have happen is have the maximum height force design solutions that we don't think are kind of appropriate for this kind of community. So what's happening is that if the way that the maximum height is defined now, it actually favors flat roof buildings. So in other words, if you're trying to maximize the building volume, you would tend to build a flat roof building and not a pitched roof building, because a pitched roof building doesn't give you enough, you know, thinking from a developer's point of view, wouldn't give you the same amount of enclosed volume. So really it's giving equal footing to those who are desiring to build a pitched roof building as it is to those who are building a flat roof building. But then I also think that there's an aesthetic reason that aesthetically having a peak of a roof line up with a flat roof building is a little bit awkward. So in a way you would want a peak roof building to get a little bit of an advantage. It really requires a diagram. It requires a diagram. So the other thing is, well, I can go on and on about how buildings are measured, but I hope that makes some sense. But we're trying not to force Amherst to become a flat roof building by having one number that fits all. And indeed, we could have either a diagram to explain this, or we could say, if you have a pitched roof building, then your maximum height is actually.
I do understand about the different architectural reasons for doing this, but I think for people to be able to deal with these complex regulations, there has to be some way to make it readable and understandable to people. I mean, I've really put in some effort on this. You know, not everybody has the time to do
I know. It's
You
true.
guys have too. And, you know,
Could you come to the microphone, because we're being recorded if you have longer speech. So I think we realize that it's not easy to understand, and so I think a diagram will make it a lot easier to understand.
Yeah.
Easier than really it is now. So. Bruce.
I think it would be helpful also to see in the diagram a flat roof building next to a pitched
Yeah,
roof building
right.
to show examples of each
All of
one,
them, yeah.
how they would look as a streetscape.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further comment on the dimensional table? We're happy with the ranges that are proposed. Mr. Tucker?
Comment, which relates to something that has just come up. And it has to do with footnote B. And footnote B, depending on how you read it, might indicate to some people that for certain zoning districts and for certain types of buildings, no frontage is required. And the planning department thinks that that's actually not true, that some frontage is required. It's just not clear from reading the zoning bylaw that there is frontage required. And so we've been going back and forth between subdivision control law and the zoning bylaw trying to figure this out, and we've been in touch with town council. And so it may be worthwhile, since we're looking at these footnotes, to add an addition to footnote B, which refers back to the subdivision control law and, you know, makes a statement. I haven't, you know, formulated the wording exactly, and I didn't have a chance to talk to Mr. Tucker about this today, but some sentence that says something to the effect of, you know, in certain cases, a frontage of at least 20 feet would be required, and that would be in keeping with, what is it, Mass General Law, Chapter 41, which is the subdivision control law, Section 81L, which refers to the fact that if you don't have a specified frontage required in your zoning bylaw, that you default to a 20-foot frontage. So it's not clear from reading this footnote B, and I've been puzzled by that for a long time, and so it might help to clarify that a bit with some added language. But as I said, I haven't figured out exactly what that language should be.
Are there other dimensions in the subdivision control law that are also a default?
Not really. Excuse me,
Yeah.
I'll just continue
go
that. In order for a lot to be, in order for an applicant not to have to file a subdivision plan and to merely file an A&R, if he wants to have a buildable lot, he has to have lot area and frontage that conforms to the zoning bylaw. And footnote B says you don't have to conform to lot area, but you can't really build anything on something that has 0 lot area. So that's sort of logically, you know, you can push that aside. But you could build something on a property that has 0 frontage, but we in the planning department are currently contending that that's not what this footnote B really means, or that's not our interpretation of it.
The intent of footnote B was to relieve certain residential uses from the requirement to meet the existing minimum lot frontage, which still applies to a couple of specific residential uses. And so we could do one of several things. As Ms. Restrup points out, we could reference the applicable Subdivision Control Act provisions so that there's that default there always, but we could also put language in there indicating that the purpose of this is to relieve the property from having that minimum frontage, but does not relieve it does not relieve anyone of frontage, the requirement to have frontage entirely.
But actually, so that means you couldn't build on an interior lot in a commercial district or something.
You can, under certain circumstances, under the Subdivision Control Act, if there is, if the planning board determines that there is sufficient guaranteed access to the property that is not going to go away, then the planning board can approve a lot as buildable that does not have street frontage, because the whole purpose of having street frontage is to be able to get to the street, to and from the street, for not only the use of the property, but also for safety, emergency vehicles, and so forth.
I don't know, it seems to me that it's not really a problem. I don't,
We have a default, and we don't always reference the Subdivision Control Act, so, I was leaning towards something simple, adding something like, but in no cases shall the frontage be less than 20 feet, or it must be at least 20 feet. We know that conforms with Subdivision Control Act, but not referencing it. However, what if you did have a landlocked interior parcel and you wanted to build a garage on it, then this would say it must be 20 feet. So it's almost better to be silent and just know that the Subdivision Control Act kind of rules, because otherwise we get all snarled up.
I tend to agree with that. I think that if we get an interpretive system in place with town council, then we'll be dealing with that. I'm concerned that this kind of thing happens all the time, which is why we're always bringing you these minor amendments saying, wait a minute, this isn't working. This is something I think that if we were going to address it, we should address it separately, and maybe for the fall or something, rather than tying it to the quite different purposes of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Given that this is existing language in our bylaw, and the only change we're suggesting is which zones it applies, zoning districts it applies to.
I agree with that. I just couldn't resist bringing this up because I'm going to be.
Now you know about it, and you can't get away.
Couldn't hold you at a case that is related to this issue later tonight in the planning board meeting.
okay, thanks.
Context.
Actually, something did occur to me. I think this is new. There's on Part B, the basic minimum front setback for, there's a footnote or a superscript C, and I just want to make sure that that's in the right place. I'm not sure whether the C applies to the range or to the maximum or what.
C
If it applies to
C
one,
refers to any part of a building which is within 200 feet of the side boundary of a residence district abutting on the same street within the same block. Actually, this can, but that's an interesting question. Do we want to apply that to that or not? That, generally speaking, that has only been used in the general business district previously.
Right, yeah, so I think it was not in previous drafts, I'm not certain, and I noticed that it's there, and I'm not, it sort of confused me, so I want to be clear about what it means, whether we even want it. So do people understand the issue there? It's, if you're within the BVC zone, and the building is within 200 feet of a residence zone, that's when the range applies. Otherwise, there would be no minimum setback. So for in the BVC without, if it's not near a residence district, there would be no setback. Is that okay?
What seems a little bizarre is that it's 200 feet of the district rather than 200 feet from a residence or
Right.
a parcel. So, you know, I don't know if we have a standard somewhere else that you couldn't build right up onto the property line if you're within so many feet of somebody's property, but to have it be of the district, I'm not sure what it accomplishes.
I think what it's doing here is saying that if you're not, I think the intent may have been that if the property is not within 200 feet of the side boundary of a residential district, then there isn't a front setback requirement. It essentially waives the front setback requirement.
That's what it is.
This is a
Right.
pretty fuzzy way to say that. If you, I don't know.
And so, yeah, so that's why I was thinking that this, if there is a C, it should be on the 10 minimum, not on the maximum. We still don't want, you know, in the middle of a BVC zone, we don't want it to be more than 20 feet back.
Right.
Well, the purpose of the setbacks is to set up some aesthetic consistency, so I would see no reason why, you know,
Yeah.
why we would want to
Why we would wanna
leave it for
apply it
that
at
particular
all.
reason.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm tending to agree. I'm not sure why we would apply it at all.
Okay.
in this case.
Can we just
It's like stump the stars.
get rid of
on
it and
that
see who
one.
complains?
Yeah,
I don't think it was there to begin with. It was,
float it out there.
See who shows up at the office on Monday?
Yeah, this is just BBC.
okay, so that, you're saying it does apply in,
It still applies in BG.
On section B, we're taking it out.
Oh,
on
no,
section-
you're right, in BG, we're taking it out. Although in that case, we have a 0 minimum, so that there's no difference.
Do we need it?
Yeah, then it's redundant.
Well, it's not,
Repetitively
it's
redundant.
not, in the proposed change in the BG district, there is no, the footnote C is not carried through, because you're
Oh,
establishing a new
It's just in the existing.
set of criteria, so.
so delete that
Sure,
entire
what-
footnote?
No, I'm not sure, I'd have to look at the table, I'm not sure why that's in there.
That's the only place it applies right now.
No place to merge.
I'm sure our public audience and our viewing audience is very happy that they could participate in the analysis of footnote C.
Footnote C is, what should I say, very important to a certain application that is going to come before you relatively soon. So, and that has to do with the BG zoning district. And this project has already gone before the Historical Commission and the DRB, so it's out there in the public. It's the Unitarian Church. So if you were to eliminate footnote C from the BG district, that would press issues for that particular project.
Well, this would not,
I don't know if the board was considering eliminating footnote C entirely or just from that one place that they talked about it.
That's the only place it is right now.
yeah, it only exists in the BG district. Even if you proposed to remove it, which would then confuse everything else, because you'd have to enumerate all of the rest of the footnotes, and I think let that sleeping dog lie. I don't think that you would want to do that now.
Yeah, okay.
Could we just remove it from BVC where it didn't exist prior?
Yes,
That-
I
that would
understood that
make-
was what the
I think
subcommittee
that would
wanted.
keep everybody happy.
Right, right. Okay. Any further comments on mixed-use center district dimensions? Okay, so we have a public hearing on non-conforming structures. The planning board has decided that it's going to work on this itself. So we haven't devoted any time really to it since we first started talking about it. Does the zoning subcommittee wish to take a look at that article?
I would note, as we did last time, that there is explanatory material on the back page that explains each section. I believe it's also the intent of the building commissioner to be present tonight to speak to this.
Oh, good. Okay, thanks.
I had one question for staff who prepared this for us. Just in 9.20 at the end, it says, well, maybe I'll read this for people's benefit or listening, that we've added the language, for the purposes of this section, a structural alteration shall be any change to the exterior of the building or other structure which involves alteration, relocation, enlargement, or reconstruction of walls, or other significant elements of the building or structure. And I always get a little worried when we say other significant elements, and it may be fine, but is there a way to give that specificity? I mean, we were asked, I think, by people who had come to earlier meetings to be specific about what what triggered this. And you've done that in your drafting, but what are the others? What other significant elements? How do you decide that?
We include language like that because we don't always know what we're going to run into. What the exterior of a building might include.
So the building commissioner would interpret that.
The building commissioner would be the one who would decide as the zoning enforcement officer. And again, the purpose of that is to enable the building commissioner to be able to say, oh, well, structurally altered in the sentence above means this. That's really what that's all about. It has no operating on its own.
Like a porch. A porch would be a significant element. Stoop or decorative elements that are.
Stair tower.
Gargoyle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The gargoyle.
We're gonna have a separate section on gargoyles.
Okay, I just
That's footnote,
see.
new use for footnote C. No gargoyle shall be.
Okay, so do we want to make a recommendation to the planning board, or just let the planning board handle it entirely? I don't feel the need to do anything, but if we want to.
I'm happy with it.
Okay. Let's spend some time on form-based design regulations.
A number of things have been done to this, probably the most notable of which is the removal of the tables. We have not yet, and I wanted to talk a bit about whether or not we wanted to take the photographic illustrations of building or site types out. I think they have a value, particularly given that there's a note on each one that says these represent possible solutions, exact conditions may vary, proposals shall meet the intent. In the case of building types, the table came out, and instead the content of the table went in as text. That starts at section 14.2, which is the fourth page. We haven't enumerated the pages because things keep being taken in and out.
Okay. Again, I would like to keep the pictures in. Bruce?
I would as well, especially since the last time people were concerned that somehow these regulations were going to make buildings all look alike, and that's clearly not seen in these photos, so I think the photos are good.
Okay, so last time we started going through this paragraph by paragraph with suggestions. Shall we pick up where we left off, or is there any change beforehand? Let me see.
The other thing that was taken out were the location-specific design regulations for North Amherst Village and Atkins Corners.
So there's an educational form overlay district that's still in here.
Yes, because that was intended to be, in fact, a zoning district change that would respond to the edges of, in this case, the Hampshire Village campus as it responded to the village center across the street. So for the time being, that's in there.
Okay. Right, and it's conceivable that we might want to put that somewhere else. Although this is specific to the language here says that it is, EDF is only applying in one place, but maybe it should be more general.
Yeah, and we could just take out those specific references, you create the district, and then you apply it where you want it to go.
Right.
I'd prefer that than creating a district for one geographic area, create the district.
Okay, so last time we got up to 14.1024, I think, or did we get farther than that?
Yes, you had asked, you had noted that some of the proposed requirements for accessibility were already required under the code. We didn't need to replicate that in the language. There was a change to how to treat a half floor where we had an existing building. What else changed here? But I think, as you say, that was where the changes ended.
And this still does not include the previous 16.7, 8, and 9. Is it
No.
going to?
It does not. Do you want it to?
Can you remind me what that is?
16.7 is off-street parking and access standards. 16.8 is landscaping, screening, and lighting. And 16.9 is administration.
That administration section had a provision, rather than sort of instance by instance, had a global provision for form-based districts overall that essentially said, if somebody wants to propose something that falls outside of the form-based guidelines, whoever the permit granting authority is can entertain that notion, and if they believe that it meets the purposes of the form-based district, even if it doesn't meeting the letter
Right.
of those, they can
Just
do so.
Sort of the wild card,
Special
It would-
permit, yeah.
right, which was creating some concern for some people. I do notice, going back, and I'm now remembering, like 14.101, we had quite a discussion about the standards for treatment of historic properties according to the National Park Service, which I objected to, but I don't know if we resolved it, but it's still in here. So at some point, we can cycle back to that.
Okay.
We can go on, because
I believe since last time we did send the members copies of
it did not convince me.
I wasn't
Yes, you did.
supposing that it did.
You
I was
said,
just
oh, once
saying.
you see these, you'll change your mind. Right.
No, that's not what I said. I said, once you see these, you'll know what they are. So,
You did. You did say that.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not bothered by the language, but I also don't mind if you want to change it, so,
I just noticed it was still there since I
Yeah.
actually haven't.
um,
We'll let greater minds than mine wrestle with that one.
okay. Any comments on 1025 or 1026? I wanted to put, I'm not sure if this is where the place is to put it. We had that chart, former footnote P for the dimensional table that talked about occupation of frontage or something. And I thought that was useful to have, and I forget where I thought it should go at. I thought it could be pulled out of the table and actually put into the text. Frontage zones. Okay, so that's. Oh right. Okay, so yeah, I suggested I have my note says put that in 14.222, possibly as 14.2222.
Has a ring to it.
Frontage occupation, 14.233.
Let's see. This is the previous version. Let's see. It was frontage zones.
It's the page just prior to the first illustrations of building and site.
Yes, 233. Yes, right. So I thought maybe that could be a third subparagraph. And then you could also delete the second sentence of the main paragraph there.
Sorry, say that again.
Delete this paragraph. Add it there.
Article 6.
Yeah. Because rather than putting it in Article 6, I'm saying just put it right in that text.
As the third entry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Changes?
Messed up.
I wanted to ask a question about that ground story height issue that you were discussing previously.
Mhm.
I think I heard Mr. Tucker say that the measurement of the, where you have a first floor that's more than 5 feet above the adjacent sidewalk, that the area below that would be considered half a story. But I think I heard him say that that was for existing buildings. And is that right?
When this was originally written, I believe the intent, as the first currently struck phrase indicates, in the case of adaptive reuse or renovation of existing buildings, that was taken out, and I think the subcommittee at the last meeting was saying, well, there might, in some circumstances, so long as you are providing full accessibility one way or another, there might be a reason, maybe the street is on a cross slope or something, where you would want to be able to start a half story on one end of the building, and as you go up the street, you've got, you get up to the next floor by the time you get to the other end of the building. And you still would have access and so forth. And then how do you account for what that means as a floor?
Okay, all right, I understand now.
Exactly. I do like having the building types as paragraphs rather than as a table. I think it's a lot easier to read for me. But in the table, it had been proposed that certain building types were appropriate for certain zones, and I wonder if we want to keep that or just assume that all buildings are appropriate for all zones?
Well, the only,
So for instance, actually,
the thing to recall is that all of these regulations apply to the mixed use. The intent is to create a general set of form-based design regulations that apply to all mixed-use center districts, and in some select instances to the Village Center Residence District as well. So if you read through the building paragraphs here, the introductory paragraph talks about the different districts that they apply to, which are all business districts. And you get to 14.214, it specifies that that particular use type, building type, would be appropriate in only 3 of the
okay.
existing mixed-use center districts.
Actually, that's exactly what I was going to propose, so that meets my expectations for that.
Under public and private open space types, we kept, although we're still tinkering with, we kept the table because it had information that lent itself to a tabular form where it could be a chart.
Right.
Came to that. There were no other significant changes there. There still is, because I wasn't quite sure what you wanted to do with it. It was specific to North Amherst, and we might want to have this be a sort of a generalized overlay district that would apply in any of the other village centers where we have streams, or stream corridors, where you're creating an overlay district that says you can meet some of your open space requirements in the denser portions of this village center if you provide improvements for public access and so forth in this stream corridor.
Okay.
So we hadn't changed that yet, but one way of dealing with that would be to turn it into a generalized stream corridor overlay district and then apply it to the specific areas as they come along.
So that sounds like a good idea. The problem that I have with that is that means that we would have to then have a map that shows where it might apply in any district, and I think we wanted to shy away from that this time.
I'd like to table that for now.
Yeah. So let's. I mean, we could still leave the language in and then just not apply it anywhere. That's another possible. I guess I want to talk about this 5% thing. It was one thing that always sort of confused me about the form-based. Okay, so section 14.3, right at the top there, the goal for all public and private open space types is a minimum of 5% of the total acreage of each district. And I guess that's, it's a little harder to apply when you don't have a specific area in mind right now. So this would apply to all the mixed use zones, and I'm not really sure what the goal is. To me, it seems the goal that we might want is a minimum of 5% of open space that is public. Maybe that's what we want. It seems a goal that is more tangible than public and private open space types.
Seems to just looking at this, and I'm glad you brought our attention to it, it seems that that's the kind of statement that would go in a master plan, because I don't see, unless you're having 5% of each project or each parcel or each proposal, how do you ever measure, well, you, Mr. Applicant, have to do 20% because we're just shy of our 5% goal. So it's aspirational and maybe a good goal, but I don't know how it has any meaning here.
It, you have to remember, when these were originally proposed, they also were accompanied by rather significant changes to the dimensional regulations, including in the new districts. And there are other provisions in here as well that provided the context for that. Those other provisions were going to get you to the 5%. So you're right. Now, what it does is represent a kind of a generalized goal without a specific mechanism for achieving it beyond, unless you create one. I mean, there's the bylaw now says you have to have so much of the lot that's not covered with buildings and pavement. It doesn't tell you what to do with the rest of that.
So I would suggest we take it out because I don't know how it has meaning for a whole district.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So just that sentence or the whole section are you talking?
I would actually recommend that you sit down with this section and think about some of these specific dimensions, whether we're talking about lot size for different kinds of open space types. There are, as you go to the next page, there are specific requirements for squares and plazas. There are specific requirements for open space associated with individual properties. 14.34, I guess, is the first level of implementation for that 5% goal. And but that would need to be compared to what does the bylaw or the dimensional regulations do now, and how do those match up? In the general business district, 5% is all of what is not buildings and pavement on conforming properties, which is the minority of them.
I would still suggest, Ms. Prescott had her hand up first.
I just wanted to encourage you to think about the front setback and how that would relate to these public open spaces, because if you have a front setback that's between 0 and 20 feet, there's really not a lot of room to have public open space on the property unless you have it around the side or around the back. So I think those practicalities of how much space do you have and where might this actually occur would figure into this, if you're going to consider this section at all.
I guess I have a broader concern because I think we're working on this now, and that's great, but what I heard at the full planning board is some members didn't want to go ahead with dimensional regulation changes as we were just working on for those 3 districts without the companion piece of what it was going to look like, the form-based design and development standards, and it probably needs a lot of attention, and I'm trying to think of a way that we can actually get this done so that we have a piece to be that companion for what I think is critical that we do sooner, not later, on those 3 zoning districts. So I don't know how to go forward to get something that's crisp and clear and ready. Just frustrating.
I think you can rewrite it so that it refers to what the dimensional regulations are now. It's really a set of guidelines for using the existing space that's not built on. And, I mean, you could just you reframe it that way. This was designed as a sort of more aggressive proposal. This was intended to go out and create it rather than use what the current dimensional regulations, which would not need to be changed if you.
Right, but aren't we now applying this to existing districts? And when it says something like, in the listed districts, 5% of individual properties shall be developed, we've changed our approach, and yet we still have these numerical standards.
Bear in mind that what we're doing is we're working our way through this. We have an existing template.
I know, but we may be
Yeah.
working our way out of it, because
You may.
if this doesn't apply, if this doesn't work with the districts we're working on right now, then how, and people are relying on this piece to make sure the appearance and the form and the massing and the construction, the design is site sensitive, but we're putting a layer on that's not gonna work.
So what you could do is say that for the time being, what this section would include is not any of the requirements in terms of dimensions, but instead, if you're gonna have public open space and so forth, here's how you treat it, essentially.
But knowing that that's
conceptually.
not what we have right now to look at.
No, that's correct, because what you have right now is what we
No,
had
I
before.
understand, it's a historic evolution.
Okay, so, yeah, so that's where I thought that we should be headed. If you have open space, or these are the kinds of open space that we would like, public open space that we would like to have for a mixed-use center to complete the center, to make it friendly and livable. These kinds of open spaces. So how do we encourage their development? And I guess what has been suggested is, if you're going to make it, this is how we want it to look. It doesn't go, or maybe it's not really possible to go to the extent of you must create public open spaces. That in certain zones that's not going to be possible. In certain zones they're already there. I mean, there's some places have commons and so on. So it might not be even necessary in some places, but not all the business zones have public open spaces. And we do want them to look a certain way.
But we can't say X percentage of your site shall be.
Right.
No, but you can say a certain percentage of any site is slated to not have buildings and pavement on them. For treatment of the remaining area, if they are developed as any of these types of open spaces, here are the guidelines.
But they don't have to be developed as those, they can just be grass.
Well, you can say they have to be, you could say they need to be one. Maybe it's a green, maybe it's a park, maybe it's a yard or a private open space, which is one of the types.
What if there's,
Give them options.
go ahead.
I was just going to ask the question about whether developers would be willing to provide public open space because of liability issues. And, I don't have an answer to that question, but that's certainly something that comes to my mind, having dealt with developers in the past. So.
Okay, so keep the public and private open space types, because even if you can't use it, you can see it sometimes, and that helps create an atmosphere.
I would also think a private open space could be something like a sidewalk cafe in the pavement in front of a building to allow for restaurant tables, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
private, but it's being used by the public.
Yeah, square plaza.
I think I would prefer not being so specific and assuming that somebody who would be building in a village center or downtown would want to perhaps have a small area for outdoor dining, so they would do it on their own without having to be really rigid in the specifications. I mean, again, you could have suggestions if they do that, what it might look like, but you're not saying it has to be 5% or 10% or whatever. It would be up to them.
At this stage.
Mm-hmm.
We'll take a hack at that
Okay, thank you.
technical term.
So that's,
Remaining piece, there are some illustrations of those kinds of spaces. And the remaining text is about how to encourage lots that are made non-conforming by these rules, how to encourage them to redevelop, to become conforming. And there are a series of illustrations that speak to the additions on different portions of a property.
Yep, and that's one of my favorites from the first time around. I like them. So I, you know, I know we don't have it in front of us, but I would like to say again that I don't want to lose the off-street parking and access standards section. Maybe not exactly the way it is written here, but some of these things are part of form-based design regulations as we originally envisioned them, and they're still useful. Landscaping, screening, and lighting standards, maybe not so important, but it's, I'd at least like to go through it with the committee. So this includes the Sustainable Development Design Standards, so part of it doesn't have to be reproduced.
We could have that for you for next time, given the clock. I wonder if it would make sense to speak to the last
Okay.
few items on the agenda.
Yep, let's do that.
I can summarize the two potential new amendments very quickly. Residential parking maximum, we had been telling you for some time that some things might come out, and this is still a might, of the rental regulations portion of work of the Safe and Healthy Neighborhood Working Group, that some changes in zoning might be needed to respond to that work. And where their parking regulations sit right now, they are predominantly referring to zoning parking regulations rather than creating their own separate regs, although they may do a little bit. So one of the notions that came up under that process was having not only a minimum number of parking spaces for residential uses, but for residential rental uses having a maximum, having 1.4 spaces per tenant, or no more than that. And that was felt would predominantly apply to properties that are being converted to rentals and so forth, and what that would do is prevent excessive paving on properties, and no more parking spaces than were needed. There has been some concern because there is in some areas a proliferation of sort of impromptu parking lots serving adjacent properties, which are illegal and will be, and I'm quite sure our code enforcement folks will get to those, but we don't want that to be encouraged to continue. We don't want people creating extra parking just in order to serve other properties.
Given that a couple renting a unit has 2 cars and they both have jobs and families, how do you reduce that to 1.5?
That would be 2
There's
people.
a minimum
But
of 2 per dwelling unit.
it's not per person.
But it's
1.5 parking spaces per tenant.
that would be
per
2 people.
tenant. Per tenant, so who's on the lease. So if you have 4 people in a dwelling unit, you can't have more than 6 parking
Okay,
spaces.
but you can have 2 parking spaces. Those 2 would be the minimum.
Yeah, you're not
And
going
you
less
could
than
go
2.
up to 3.
In the case of 4 unrelated or whatever, you can go up to,
6.
Okay,
depending on the
All right,
number of
then I didn't-
tenants. If it's 2 people, then it's 3. If it's 4 people,
okay,
then it's 6.
okay. So I guess I read this wrong as tenant, as tenancy. Is it changing the unit?
It's
So
per
I'm wrong.
individual tenant.
Must be time for supper.
So anyway, just to introduce that notion, and
So we're not doing anything about it.
the next,
Wait a minute, we're not, what do you mean we're not doing anything about it?
Said I just want to introduce it, so are we discussing it?
So,
want to discuss?
well, so the thought was that maybe this would come to Springtown meeting?
We would like the option to have it go to Springtown meeting and to put it on the list and keep it there on a provisional basis. We have language. We could schedule public hearings in April if we had to. And if it got all the way to Springtown meeting and they decided they didn't need it, you can always move to dismiss it.
So I would be in favor of that. I think it's okay with adding to the list. We can ask the planning board whether it's willing to add to the list.
Can we talk at some point about the 1.5? If not today, then in the future?
Sure, of course.
Sure. Well, let's look at the other one, and then we'll come back to it, yeah.
The other one has come up as an opportunity. We've had several conversations, in fact, for quite a long time, we've been having conversations about how it would be very useful to find places in Amherst that where student housing could go that would not be impactful to existing single-family residential neighborhoods or any other form of neighborhood. We have some artful local developers who are always coming in and asking about things and suggesting things, and we can't take credit for this notion, but they pointed out something that was they pointed out the nose on our face, which is that Amherst has zoning districts that were created specifically for the purpose of housing students, and that's the fraternity residence district, which includes a use category called social dormitory, which is neither a fraternity nor a sorority, but simply a dormitory. We have 2 of these zoning districts. One of them is up around Olympia Drive. Most of that is owned by UMass. There are 2 private parcels there, a fraternity and sorority parcel, which might be redeveloped. More importantly, there are 3 properties in one single village, fraternity residence district within the campus. It's a privately owned. It's the Newman Center and the 2 fraternities immediately north of that. Though that area, that property might be redeveloped in a much more substantial way as student housing or a mix of uses, including student housing. We were looking at the existing older dormitories up on Orchard Hill, along Clark Hill Drive, and up in the northeast section of campus. And you have 5- and 6-story brick buildings there that have pitched roofs, that have a certain traditional architectural style that would fit. And I'm not proposing that that was what would happen, but that could fit on on those properties. If we were going to consider this, staff would recommend that the first step that we could take is to simply loosen up 3 of the existing dimensions, which is on the first page, for this district: the building coverage, the lot coverage, and the height, by allowing modification through a special permit. Just in this district. It wouldn't apply anywhere else. It would be just in the fraternity residence district. And again, context would be applied to any such modification. I think as a second step, if this was important, felt to be an important way to go, would be to look at the area that is within the campus itself and develop more substantial dimensional changes for that, and perhaps design guidelines as well. Perhaps taking a look at the UMass master plan and the kinds of architectural and massing principles that contains, and seeing if that's a useful guide. But for now, if this was something that we wanted to allow the opportunity for people to try and do something between now and the fall, just loosening up those 3 dimensional requirements in just this zoning district would provide an opportunity. Whether it would happen or not, we have no idea. But
I think this is excellent, and I would really hope we could make this a priority. I think it's a great idea.
I take a slightly contrarian position. I think it's a good idea, and I don't know that I have the bandwidth to deal with this on the docket with the other changes we have, and I think this may take attention away, both our own and the public, town meeting's attention, from what we're already working on, which is a pretty full docket. And I'd like to see us look at this very seriously. It is a serious issue in a comprehensive way, and I think it's good to realize that that's one opportunity, and hopefully there's others, and that make it part of our summer work for the board and the subcommittee to look at areas for student housing and a way to approach it. So I think it's very good to acknowledge this opportunity, but I'm actually feeling more conservative about diving into it, even if it's just tweaking some dimensional regs. But that's just my first response. And
Are any of the properties non-conforming as far as lot area now?
No. Well, maybe one of them,
Okay, so,
of the 5.
right. One of the important ones. I mean, one of the ones on campus.
Yeah.
So that might also be need to change. So I agree that, and we might want to do, as Connie was saying, a more comprehensive look at the zone, rather than do a little bit now and then come back again, say we're going to do RF again. So I agree with you. It seems like a great opportunity.
No, I understand your point, because I've thought all along we need to look at other areas of town as well. I guess I thought of this moving forward in the sense that I think it would show people that there is something happening, and that it might make the other articles more likely to be approved, because I think there is such a fear of the spread of student housing that this is at least a start. But I certainly understand the other point, too.
I could be persuaded in one way or the other. What do you feel?
I'm kind of,
Well, so let's
I see a lot of promise in this.
Yeah.
So I think that, one thing is you look at the abutters, which are primarily institutional uses, so, or
Might that be a starting place to have that
Yeah.
conversation with people in campus planning and others, because we're sort of here in our bubble thinking of this, and it seems like something we want to
yeah,
collaborate.
that would be, actually, that's a good idea.
Which then puts the timeline gets further out too, I don't know.
I think my only concern is the potential for loss of opportunity.
I hear that.
If we could, with some very small changes here, preliminary changes, with the thought we'd be coming back. This is the first change. We're going to come back to continue to look at this the rest of the comprehensive way. But that's
My inclination would be to carpe diem, seize the moment.
When in doubt, flip it to the planning board.
right. So
go.
so
There you go.
but how about does it make sense to put an A next to 40,000 as well, the first line?
I think it might. Yes.
Okay.
Because
Wait,
of
so the question was, would it to also change that?
The first line, basic minimum lot area.
To figure out what the,
Yeah, because we might have.
Well, one of them might not be
Yes.
conforming, so
by how much, do we know? Or?
I don't know.
A few thousand square feet.
Okay, so I guess, did anyone take a look at this in email, the natural resource conservation zoning?
I have the drafter of it here.
Yeah, so
I did read.
I heard about this a week or so ago, and a week ago, I guess. And I thought it was worth looking at. My sense was that it was not very much different than zoning that we currently have, and in fact, staff has confirmed that. So I don't see a need to pursue this now, but I thought it was worth looking at, worth considering at least, and I appreciate the analysis.
The principal difference is that this is, the NRC proposal is more or less by right. There are aspects of it that could be by special permit, but it's more or less by right. Whereas the open space community development method that Amherst uses is a special permit. It's a planning board special permit, but it's a special permit. And there are some other minor changes, but or minor differences. One of which may not be so minor in that the natural resource conservation development method includes TDR, whereas open space, Amherst does not have TDR. We could amend the open space community development method regulations if we did, but we don't have it.
So in your analysis, there's one partial sentence that's highlighted, bolded?
There is the NRCs, which I'm going to lapse into acronym world here, National Resource Conservation, because you have to say it so many times after a while you start tripping over your tongue. The NRC specifically allows for and encourages developers to allow public access to the preserved open space. OSCDs do not do that directly. What they do instead is say that you want to preserve the traditional uses of the majority of the land, whether that's farming or logging or whatever it is, in order to preserve public access to the recreational and other traditional activities that occur on that land. The board could read that as meaning, the permit granting body, in this case the planning board could read that as meaning, well, you kind of need to have some form of public access to this, or otherwise this purpose is not being met. But it doesn't say so explicitly.
Okay. Is there anything else we need to cover tonight? Anyone? People want to make a comment?
I just had a question. I must have missed some, oh, sorry. Melissa Pura, Precinct 1. I must have missed the meeting where you discussed bringing in RVC to the form-based design regulations. Can you fill me in and say why you chose to bring in residential?
It's so we wanted to apply form-based design regulations to mixed-use districts, and the RVC is a mixed-use district. It has some allowance for light office use, and it's considered part of a village center zoning. So if we're proposing guidelines for the BVC part of a village center, we would probably also want those design guidelines to apply to the RVC part of that village center.
When you say mixed use, are you talking about mixed use buildings or mixed use neighborhoods?
Neighborhoods that have both.
RVC doesn't allow mixed use buildings.
Yes, it does.
It does.
It does. They are, however, limited. The business types are limited to offices that get very low visitation, like administrative offices and so forth. It's not drive-up bank facilities or anything like that. It is office uses, and of those, things like lawyers and architects and or the administrative office of a business, where the only people who come there are the people who work there and the delivery people. Low level and on the first floor with residential uses above.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Janet Slocum from Henry Street. I just wondered if you could just tell me the process of what's going to happen here if you're done discussing it tonight. What then happens to it?
To it meaning this zone
resource conservation zoning proposal.
We're going to table it and probably not use it again unless we decide to look at OSCD and possibly make changes to that. This was just a suggestion for possible zoning amendment, possible development method that we don't currently have in our bylaw, but that the developer of the Henry Street property thought might be useful for that kind of property. The analysis by staff and by the committee is that this zoning is already mostly contained in our current zoning bylaw under a different name.
Okay.
So we're not going to do anything more with this probably.
Okay, thank you.
It doesn't have any effect on the project that's being proposed. There was someone who wanted to make a statement. I'm not sure if he's still here. I guess I'm sorry about that. Ms. Keller?
Janet Keller, Precinct 1. On the open space, I would urge you to try to find a way to make that a part of any form-based zoning. I would further note that there's an economic issue at stake, and that if folks follow the money, they won't put the open space in. So, and I would say that folks that you're wanting to vote for this are going to want to see it in. So,
Can you, I'm sorry to interrupt, can you suggest how exactly to?
No, I cannot.
Okay.
You're the zoning subcommittee. I just wanted to point out that it would be a big selling point to have people reassured that that would be in there. I perfectly understand what you're saying if you're talking about BG or, but there are other places that have places where there can be these things that soften, and that's going to be important.
Okay.
On 16, the administration piece, 16.991, I would point out that the reaction to that was pretty strong, and a feeling that it was a wide open door, and if you've got form-based, if you've got design regulations, if you've got a design overlay, again, there always have to be waiver provisions, but let's not have them be wide open and anything goes kind of thing. And that was what people found objectionable about that the last time. Still a great number of concerns about the density here when you combine first floor residential, doubling the residential areas on the upper floor, quadrupling, or as Mr. Schreiber said, I don't even know what that, but you know, the multiplication number is, but greatly increasing the number of units on the second floor in the allowing 3 floors instead of 2, increasing the height, increasing the lot coverage, substantially decreasing the setbacks. And when you put all that together, it's quite a lot of increase in density, which is concerning, and not a worry not in keeping with our predominantly low density area out in the northernmost reaches of North Amherst. I think I've said a lot of these other things before, so I'm not going to say them now. I do want to say again that the way the changes are broken up in title has the effect of disguising a major rezoning and for North Amherst and other places that would be affected, and we request that you rename and describe any rezoning package so it makes clear the degree and the extent of the rezoning involved. Thank you.
You mean the title of the article, you're saying? The
title of the various, you get a bunch of little pieces, and it looks like so many little packages of penny candy from the from the store, but it really adds up to quite a significant increase. It's a big zoning change, and it needs to have a label on it that says, here comes a big zoning change, and it has these features. And, you know, here's why we support it, or here's why we don't support it, but let's be real clear about what it is.
If I may, just quickly, one of the reasons the subcommittee asked that it be broken up in this way is so that town meeting and others can say, can move to consider this piece but not that piece, or move to, so that it has a logical structure to it, which enables town meeting to approve or disapprove different pieces rather than take the whole thing or leave the whole thing. We always try to do that so that there's the maximum opportunity for citizens to determine what the outcome will be.
I appreciate that very much, and having noted that, would still ask that it be clearly noted as it's a package, and if the entire package were adopted, it has X effect. I haven't done the numbers yet, but I think that's really important, and I think it engenders a good atmosphere that we want to have. Thanks.
I have a different perspective of the same proposal. And with all respect to Janet and how neighbors must see these proposed changes. I've done an analysis of a building that could be built today under commercial. It has, this would be called the new trolley barn, and Mr. Kuhn designed it, and it has footprint of 4,000 square feet. So on the first floor, I envision maybe 2 units, maybe a restaurant on the left, and maybe a retail store on the right of 2,000 square feet each. Currently, commercial zoning only allows 4 units above this building. So I would be able to, and it's allowed to be 3 stories today. So I would be allowed to have 4 units of nearly 2,000 square feet each. And that's larger than the square footage of the Cape House abutting this. And my experience with rental houses is that when you have a townhouse apartment complex with huge gathering areas in the middle of units, then you're inviting parties and problems. And it scares me to build this 4-unit apartment building with 2,000 square foot, 4-bedroom units. I don't want 2,000 square foot, 4-bedroom units in a building like this. A family wouldn't be able to afford it and probably wouldn't rent it. I would rather you allow more units, and Mr. Kuhn has done some math, and he's shown that if you allow more units, then instead of 4 units in this building, we would put in 8 units. And instead of 14 bedrooms, we would only have 12 bedrooms. So we would have fewer bedrooms, more manageable sizes, no 8 girlfriends living in 2 apartment buildings and a bowling alley-sized gathering area. So that's his analysis, and I hope that folks will consider the impact of more units actually means fewer bedrooms and more manageable sizes. And I don't know how I'm ever going to manage a bowling alley-sized apartment building with 4 bedrooms times 4 in this zone. So there's a benefit to a little bit of upzoning, and I don't care if it's 8 or 12. You were talking before about the number of units, but I really appreciate your adding units to the same size-ish building because it's impractical the way commercial exists today. Thanks.
And my understanding actually is that
And I can email it to you. That's not the newest version.
the 8 or 12 units would be allowed, but it would require a special permit, right? This just makes it a little easier.
I don't even think I can have, without increasing the lot size, I don't think I'm allowed more than 4 units today.
Yeah, that's the problem. The problem is that in this particular case, the issue that's being addressed is
Because
the
comma's not.
additional lot area per family in
Footnote
particular.
B.
Yeah,
I can email that around. I appreciate your
and
thinking
that's the
about it.
controlling or limiting factor.
Okay.
For this particular property. In other cases, it might be others of these dimensional requirements.
Thank you.
Well, I think we had talked at one point about having some diagrams to show us what these changes would involve, because something like this is helpful to see visually. So if we could do that, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Anyone else want
We have 5 minutes before the next meeting, so we're going to adjourn for a very short time.
Quick run, grab a coffee.